All right. Shalom, everybody. This is the Acts chapter study, and we're going to start from, we're at Acts chapter 15. We're going to be reading from groups of 10, and Mecca will start us off. Go ahead, brother.
Alright, starting at verse 1. And certain men which came down from Judea taught the brethren, and said, Except you be circumcised after the manner of Moshe, you cannot be saved. When therefore Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and disputation with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain other of them should go up to Jerusalem unto the apostles and elders about this question. And being brought on their way by the church, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria, declaring the conversion of the Gentiles. And they caused great joy unto all the brethren. And when they were come to Jerusalem, they were received of the assembly and of the apostles and elders, and they declared all things that Elohim had done with them. But there rose up certain of the sect of the Pharisees, which believed, saying that it was needful to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah of Moshe. And the apostles and elders came together for to consider this matter. And when there had been much disputing, Peter rose up and said unto them, Men and brethren, you know how that a good while ago Elohim made choice among us, that the Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the gospel and believe. And Elohim, which knoweth the hearts, bear them witness, giving them the Ruach HaKodesh, even as he did unto us, and put no difference between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. Now therefore, why tempt you Elohim to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear?
Yeah, now here's where a lot of the confusion is with a lot of people that read this chapter. So let's take it slowly as far as in analyzing. Let's cross-reference in a simple cross-referencing, and let's make sure that our idea is condensed. All right, Emeka, you wanna pull some stuff out since you read first?
I definitely know that as we go more into it, it's going to begin to, expound a little bit more on this idea of, the Gentiles, the Pharisees, saying, or the elders saying that it's mandatory that the Gentiles need to be circumcised and keep Torah of Moshe. I know it's going to get cleared up a little bit more later on, so I really don't have, at the moment, I don't have too much to add, other than we know that the Ruach HaKodesh was on the Gentiles, and it was those that believed, and I know the biggest thing is that, people think that because they were Gentiles that they weren't keeping the Torah. But later on, what we'll see is quite the opposite. So I don't got too much to add. I'm gonna hold my peace for right now.
Okay, cool, but you're absolutely right. The Gentiles definitely was keeping Torah. Now this is one of those aspects of Torah that gets clarified as well. But let me let Mike go first. Go ahead, Mike.
All right, yeah. So, what I'm seeing is, first off, there's two things with the issue that they're having, and it's one is the circumcision, and then they added in the law of Moses, which we know are still at the end of the day two different things, because we know there's two circumcisions. The scripture talks about one of the heart and then one of the flesh, but we know that the one of the flesh is a symbol. Is the word used when it's given to Abraham? It's a token or a symbol, of something, and that something is what we see first off in Deuteronomy 10:16. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. And it's used multiple times. I'm not gonna put up all the verses on that, but we have it reiterated throughout scriptures. I'll read one more. Jeremiah 4:4 says, "Circumcise yourselves unto Yahuwah, and take away the foreskins of your heart, you men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my fury come forth like fire, and burn that cannot be quenched because of the evil of your doings." So again, just showing the foreskin of the hearts is what needs to be circumcised. But one thing I do see again is that they brought up the circumcision, but then also the law of Moses, because what I'm seeing the circumcision of the heart having to do with the faith, and then the law having to do with obedience, which faith and obedience, they work hand in hand. But the issue is those people are still hanging on to the symbols and not having eyes to see what those symbols truly are. So I'll let somebody take from there.
Right. I agree. I know that remember, the circumcision of the heart was something that they needed to understand fully. And I think that is good to grasp when we go back to when he gave it to Abraham in Genesis chapter 17. It was a token. It was a token to remind them of the promise. It was a token of the promise that by faith they had their hearts circumcised because of the sacrifice. The sacrifice was incorporated with the circumcision of the heart. And I think that the promised seed was incorporated in the circumcision as well. When you look at Genesis 17, the birth or the promise of Isaac being born, or the promised seed, was connected to the circumcision, to the physical circumcision as well, to remind them that the promised seed would circumcise their hearts. So this is going to be pretty jumping back and forth because this is a big topic. This is a big topic, so help me out. First, I want to point out verse 1 and verse 5 to see who's the one bringing up this issue. So verse 1, it says, "Certain men which came down from Judea taught the brethren and said, except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses, you cannot be saved." See that? The issue is not circumcision just by itself. It's circumcision for salvation. Verse 5, it says, "But there rose up certain of the sect of the Pharisees which believed, saying that it was needful to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses." So we see where the law of that term, law of Moses, the term law of Moses is talking about the same thing that verse 1 is talking about. It's talking about the laws in which circumcision, how the process of circumcision. When you look at verse 1, it says, "Except you be circumcised after the manner of Moses." So when you go to verse 5 and it says that it is needful that they be circumcised and command them to keep the law of Moses, it's talking about only circumcision. It's not adding any other laws of Moses. Circumcision after the manner of Moses, it's needful to be circumcised and keep the law of Moses. You see, so the idea wasn't that they were talking about the whole Torah. They were specifically only talking about the laws of circumcision, and that allowed you to be saved or delivered by Yah. So that's a problem, right? Because it says here that they believed. It says in verse 5 that they believed. That means that they're taking Messiah and they're pushing Messiah aside, even though they believe that he died. They're pushing him aside to emphasize that we need to circumcise in order to be saved. You guys see that? You guys see anything else?
Yeah, no, I agree.
So I mean, as far as what you were saying was, I'm just trying to go back. Verse 1, the people who asked this was a certain men of Judea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then verse 5, it says, and some of the believers who belonged to the sect of the Pharisees rose up, saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the Torah of Moses.
Right.
So it's like you got two different groups, both agreeing of the circumcision, and then the Pharisees, they added onto theirs and the Torah. Is that correct?
Well, when you look at the beginning part, right, it says that the idea of circumcision and the manner after the manner of Moses,
right,
was brought up,
right,
before they went to Jerusalem to meet with the apostles and the elders.
Oh, okay.
So when you look at verse 5, it sounds like it's talking about another group, but this is the group that started the argument in verse 1. So when you look at verse 1 and verse 2, it says, when therefore Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and disputation with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain other of them should go to Jerusalem unto. So it's the same group, but they're going to a different place in front of the elders so they can present their argument. So it's not a different group, it's the same group presenting the same argument that they had a fight with Paul about.
Only except that they, in the second argument, should I say, in verse 5, they added, and to keep the Torah. Right?
Well, the statement saying, and to keep Torah, yeah. But the argument that they were having was from verse 1.
Right.
So when they look at verse 5, they think that when it says, and to keep Torah, it's talking about the whole Torah. Like all the statutes and judgments and things like that. That's not what they were arguing about.
Yeah, they were talking about circumcision.
Right, and all the laws in Torah pertaining to circumcision.
Oh, okay.
You can't partake in Passover. You can't do this. You can't do this. All of those aspects of circumcision.
It's going to clarify.
Bring up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's going to clarify more too.
Yeah. Later on, you'll see what they're focusing on is circumcision and salvation based off of a physical cut on your body.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I was looking at. I mean, Mike went there. He went to Deuteronomy 10, chapter 10, verse, which, because I said, well, what is the practice of Moses? You know what I'm saying? What was it? You know what I mean? And from starting in verse 1, and then the one I saw that I thought was interesting, it was in Deuteronomy 30, starting in verse 5. Oh no, starting in verse 6. And it says, Yahuwah, the Elohim, will circumcise thine heart and the heart of thy seed to love Yahuwah the Elohim with all thine heart, with all thy soul, and all that thou mayest live. So I mean, I was looking at it like, the same way Mike. I just want to bring that verse up because I thought it was it. Because the first time I always thought about circumcising the heart was in Jeremiah, and then I read this one right now. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's nothing new,
Right. Oh, absolutely. If you look at the reason why, when you look at when you look at the book of Romans chapter 4 teaches us that Yah gave the covenant to Abraham before he was circumcised. So therefore, circumcision can't be what makes you in the covenant because he gave it to Abraham before he was circumcised. You see what I'm saying? But he gave him circumcision as a token of the reality, as a sign of the reality of what he was asking Abraham to do. When you look at the book of Genesis, he's telling Abraham to follow him, to walk before him. So he's emphasizing that he needs to cut off his old kindred, his old land, his old life and now follow Yah. So he's teaching them about the cutting off of the flesh. Let me let Mike go. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I did want to bring up this is a new point for me. Well, it's not a new point, but it's new inside of Torah for me. Where I know Paul talks about, if someone who is circumcised, I'm paraphrasing, but if someone who's circumcised in the flesh, you know, pretty much continues in sin, wouldn't their circumcision be considered uncircumcised? And so for anyone who would ever think that's like, because I know there's a lot of controversy even still, even though Paul's pretty clear on this, people have issues with it, but it is actually in Torah here in Jeremiah 9:26. It says, Egypt and Judah and Edom and the children of Ammon and Moab and all that are in the uttermost corners that dwell in the wilderness, for all these nations are uncircumcised, and all the house of Israel are uncircumcised in the heart. So
right.
Exactly what Paul is talking about, that wasn't something new. And again, it also shows that this idea isn't new, even like New Testament. Like clearly Jeremiah is saying this, like they knew this stuff, that certain people understood these things. Those who had ears to hear and eyes to see understood these things. So yeah.
No, absolutely. So Torah, the prophets and the apostles and elders understood these things, but as you can see the description in Acts 15 verse 5, it says that the Pharisees that believed had that issue in their mind. Many people don't really know, but the Pharisee and the Sadducee teachings, we know that in Matthew 15, the Messiah said that they are teaching for doctrines the traditions of men, you see, and making void the commandments of God by teaching the commandments of men. So we see that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they taught some other stuff that was not connected to Torah. Matthew 15, you can check it out. So when you have here that the Pharisees believed, you got to understand what type of mindset they're coming from. They're coming from a traditional, Pharisaical, Sadducee, scribes going against Messiah mindset. And that's what becomes the issue. Not only, there's no mention in Torah that you have to be circumcised to be saved. So where are they getting this mindset from? Where are they getting this idea from? It's from the traditions that they once learned under and taught themselves, the Pharisaical mindset. So when we're looking at this, we need to understand the whole picture. So I want to just support the statements that I know Brother Mike already supported a lot of views already. I just wanted to read a few verses from Romans chapter 4, just to support some of the ideas that Paul is mentioning in this argument. Now what Mike mentioned was in Romans chapter 2, which is excellent, is saying that, and you read it in the prophets that they were uncircumcised in the heart. And Paul, and these were a nation of people who were physically circumcised. So Paul was expressing the same thing that prophet was expressing, from Romans chapter 2, where it says, if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So it doesn't matter that your physical body is physically circumcised, it still becomes uncircumcision because your mind is now against Yah instead of for him. You're walking in the flesh instead of having the flesh cut off. So Romans chapter 4, and then I'm gonna let Mike. Romans chapter 4, there's a verse in starting from verse 8, right? It says, blessed is the man whom Yah will not impute sin. So it says, does this blessedness come to the circumcision only, or upon the uncircumcision also? Because we say that faith was reckoned to Abraham for righteousness. How was it given to Abraham? When he was circumcised or when he was uncircumcised? It was not when he was circumcised, but in uncircumcision. And he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had being uncircumcised, that he might be the father of all them that believe, though they be not circumcised, that righteousness might be imputed unto them also, and the father of the circumcision to them who are not of the circumcision only, but who also walk in the steps of the faith of our father Abraham, which he had being yet uncircumcised. So it's saying that Abraham's heart was circumcised before he got physically circumcised, and that he received that covenant before he was circumcised, so he could be the father of both those who are circumcised and uncircumcised by faith. You see that? So it's clear that Abraham, we know Abraham received the covenant in Genesis chapter 12. He didn't receive circumcision for another 20-something years in Exodus chapter 17. You see what I'm saying? So you cannot directly connect the covenant to circumcision because his heart was already circumcised in Exodus 12. That's why it was accounted to him for righteousness. Go ahead. Let me see. I'm on my phone. So go ahead, JP, and then Mike.
Well, I mean, one of the things every time I look at this topic, I always come back to, I go back to Genesis 17, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm always seeing it like what, and I get what you just said, I agree. I mean, because it makes sense. But Genesis 17:9, starting at 9, it says, "And Elohim said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you, and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised, and you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations. He that is born in the house or bought with money of any stranger, which is not of thy seed. He that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money, must needs be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised man child, whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant." And the only reason I read that, because I just like I did with, the Sabbath, with the Shabbat, I see that it's an everlasting, perpetual. And so I'm seeing it in the same way. You know what I mean? Like where I do have a little bit of lean into that area of saying it is, like you said, it is a token, like it states. It shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. So I kind of lean into that area where I'm saying not to be saved, not just it's like saying once, circumcised, always saved or whatever. You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? I'm not going to say that though. You know what I mean? I'm not going to say that, but what I'm seeing in Genesis 17 is it's a token, like you stated, and it says between the covenant, a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. Right. You know what I'm saying? So right. I kind of have a little lean towards that way of saying it is an area that I'm kind of leaning to say you should have it done. It should be done as far as it being a token, not to be saved though, like in the Acts 15. That was what I want to state.
I see what you're saying. And I think that a lot of times when we look at the prophets, let me read a verse real quick. So this is Leviticus chapter 3. Leviticus chapter 3, verse 16 and 17. It says, And the priest shall burn them upon the altar. It is the food of the offering made by fire for a sweet savor or fragrance. All the fat is Yah's. It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings that you eat neither fat nor blood. Right? So it's talking about the offering made by fire and eating fat and blood. It's not talking about just having a regular old cooked meal. It's talking about what the priests need to do when they're making these offerings. So the prophecy in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 9, clearly says that the offering is going to stop. It says the offerings will stop. It says the sacrifices and offerings will stop when the Messiah is cut off. So the token represents when the Messiah is cut off. So when you're looking at the token of circumcision, it was given with the promised seed. That many people stop at Isaac, not knowing that he was promising Messiah to Abraham, that Messiah was going to come through his loins. You see what I'm saying? So when you're looking at this sacrifice, we know that sacrifice is done as far as physically, but we know that even back then they were supposed to perform sacrifices from the heart. You see that? If they did not perform it from the heart, Yah wouldn't accept their physical offering. So they, even in the Old Testament, you see the emphasis, and then you see why he's given them these physical objects or tokens to remember the reality, because they kept forgetting the reality. They gave them the continual offering to not remember the sacrifice that Yah had to send. And when Messiah came, they forgot the sacrifice. You see what I'm saying? So I see what you're saying, but you have to see that Yah is about a big picture, and he said perpetual statute for generations for a lot of stuff that Messiah specifically fulfilled. You see what I'm saying? So if we're gonna look at the statement, perpetual statute covenant, what principle about this command has to be in my mind forever? You see what I'm saying? Because there's a lot of things that it says that statement and we don't do because Messiah fulfilled. Messiah was the promised seed that was given to Abraham. Galatians 3:16 says that Yah wasn't even talking about Isaac. He was talking about Messiah, and that the promises was given to Messiah. That's why Galatians chapter 3 verse 29, it says, if we are in the Messiah, then we are Abraham's seed, because the promise was given to Messiah that was going to come through Abraham's loins. You see what I'm saying? But these guys already knew that. But in our mind, we're thinking that they don't know the reality and that he's just giving them a bunch of shadows. And that's not true. That's not true. So we have to retract what everybody told us about the Old Testament. These guys knew more about the Messiah than we did when we were in the churches. They were waiting for the Messiah. They were preaching about the Messiah. You see what I'm saying? So they knew about who the Messiah is from reading this account with Abraham. They knew. Remember what Messiah said? Abraham rejoiced to see my day. Remember that? So Abraham rejoiced to see the Messiah's day. Where does it say that? Well, the sacrifices represented the Messiah. The promised seed represented the Messiah. And he rejoiced to see the day that the Messiah will come through. And they said to him, oh, you're not even 50 years old. How do you know Abraham? You see what I'm saying? So everybody understood the reality, but we keep thinking that these commands are only physical, that he's telling them to do. He's not only telling them to do physical. They understood the reality by practicing the physical. You see what I'm saying? So we gotta kind of broaden the way this is. Let me see. I have to go back. All right, Mike, and then the Mecca.
Yeah, I just had some stuff to back that up too. For one, just also keeping in our mind that it is showing that it's a sign of the covenant, not that it is the covenant. So it's only a sign of his covenant, not the fact that the circumcision is his covenant. But 2 or 3 witnesses establishes a matter. So on what you were just saying, they did know this. Like everything that we know, we're learning from reading their writings.
Right.
Starting with Moshe, the first prophet that we have, written down. So starting with Moses in Leviticus 26:41 and Deuteronomy 10:16, Deuteronomy 30 verse 6, he mentions them having circumcised hearts. And then again, Jeremiah, another prophet, mentions them having uncircumcised hearts. And then also Ezekiel, multiple times referencing them having uncircumcised hearts. So that's three prophets, 3 witnesses in scriptures showing that they all had the same understanding that the circumcision was to be of the heart. And those were the reasons why these prophets were telling them that they were removed from the land, was because of their uncircumcised hearts. So I just bring up 3 more witnesses on that. And then also another example that you gave, the sacrifice, which I was going to go for that one, but I'll use another one, which I think is a good one too. The Levitical priests themselves, right? That was supposed to be to Aaron and his sons throughout their generations, right? But we know for a fact that was a shadow of the real priesthood. So it's the fleshly circumcision. There's many things in scriptures, like you're saying, that are just like that, between circumcision, earthly sacrifices, earthly priests. All these things are foreshadows of things that Yahusha has established. And again, the covenant being given to Messiah, what is the covenant? That he's gonna put it on our hearts. And I think it was JP was the one that read that. It says that Deuteronomy 30 verse 6, and Yahuwah thy Elohim will circumcise your heart and the seed and the heart of your seed to love Yahuwah thy Elohim with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might.
Say that one too. Say that one, the last one again. Where was that from?
Deuteronomy 30 verse 6.
Right.
I was correlating that to the fact that is what the new covenant is. It's taking away that stony heart and giving you a heart of flesh. He's removing your hard heart, your fleshly heart, and giving you a soft heart towards him.
Right. And also you got to see, like, these children were circumcised 8 days old, right? Yeah. So the command is, it seems like he's telling the 8-day-old boy, if he's not circumcised, he's going to be cut off. You see what I'm saying? Like, there has to be a reality. 8-day-old boy he's not circumcised in himself. You know what I mean? So there has to be something that's connected to that, something that he's taught. If he doesn't walk in the ways, then he will be cut off, even though he is circumcised.
He would be called uncircumcised.
Right. So you see how in Deuteronomy 30 it says that I will circumcise the heart of you and your seed. He said, I will circumcise the heart of you and your seed. So yeah, it is a command that you and your seed's heart should be circumcised. You should be bestowing on your children what the way that Yah circumcised your heart. You should be bestowing that wisdom on your children, so their minds can also be circumcised or cut off from the fleshly ways, basically.
Yeah, and the way I see it too, for me, for it to be simple for me, is like the circumcision of the flesh. What was the opposite? If you didn't do it, you would be cut off from Yah's people. So the way I see it is if you do it, it's showing, it's a symbol of you actually cutting yourself off from the world, from your own flesh. So it's like either way, you're going to be cut off from. You're either going to be cut off from Yah, or you're going to be cut off from the world. So that's just the way how I see it as a symbol.
And also, real quick, Mike, if I'm gonna let Lameka go ahead. Can you look up verse 12 in Genesis 17? See if that word child or man-child is actually in the Hebrew, because mine isn't italicized, so it looks like it's not. So it's talking about every man, So it's not like a child is thrown out because of that. But yeah, can you check that for me real quick, just to make sure? Ameka, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, one thing I was just thinking about, meditating about, is the representation of just the circumcision itself, the fleshly circumcision, and most people would say, and I guess it's scientifically proven or whatever, that you know that foreskin actually is sensitive, and it increases the or I should say, cutting it off decreases like your sexual drive, or that sensation or that temptation, and so it's like when that's kind of what that represents, is that cutting off the lust of the flesh a little bit. But just that alone in itself is not enough, because even though, men are circumcised, it doesn't prevent them from doing things, that are still, lusting of the flesh, even going beyond just sexual habits, but, greed and jealousy and stealing and things like that, so the full representation of the circumcision and the faith that, Yahuwah is looking for from, people in general is to cut off all lust of the flesh. And just cutting off a piece of foreskin really doesn't represent that. It is a small representation of it, but the fullness of it is to cut off all the lust of the flesh, and the things that we desire that are not, in line with Yahuwah's will or not, morally right, and so I was just thinking about that, and I was like, that's really more powerful when you really circumcise your heart to say, look, I want to do what's right in Yahuwah's eyes. I want to do what's right according to him and according to what he says. It's way more powerful and more stronger than you cutting off a piece of flesh. When you circumcise your heart, you're circumcising and cutting off the desires of the world, to please Yahuwah. And I think that's way more powerful, and that is what Paul was after in his mission. He was going after the Gentiles who were giving up the ways of the world, the idolatry, the fornication, the envying, and all those things. They were giving up that. They were circumcising their hearts, giving up those things to seek Yahuwah and to, seek the God that is with, the believers who believe in Yahusha, and that believe in him and keeping his commandments and his Torah. And the fact that they've seen these miracles done, they're looking at it and saying, man, like, they see it, like, wow, Elohim is with these people, Elohim is with them, and, giving them not, kind of like what we discussed earlier, not only just the miracles to do, but also giving them the wisdom and the understanding, and so them seeing that, it's like, that's what draws in the Gentiles to Elohim, to Yahuwah, that they see these things being done, and they're like, yo, we don't have a relationship like this with our Elohim. We don't have a relationship like this with any deity. This is what it is, this is what it's after. So I thought that was very interesting, that, just thinking about the actual flesh and kind of its, the purpose that it has, but when we cut it off, like, how it connects to us really cutting off the things of our heart and the pleasures. And so I thought that was, really interesting. And so I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah. I don't want to, I'm not, I don't see how it lessens the sex drive. I do know that many testimonies of individuals saying that it lessens, I guess, the sensitivity, but Israel was a nation of circumcised men, physically. When you go back, you see the sexual sins that they partook in, homosexual sins, rape, all of those same Sodom and Gomorrah type stuff. In the book of Kings, you see that prophet with the concubine and the Benjamites came they were trying to get the man. You know what I mean? So, and then he gave the concubine, and then they killed her, was raped. So it's kind of like, you know, the Midianite women that they would be tempted with, that have made them scattered. So I don't really see how biblically physical circumcision stopped them in any bit with sexual sins. They actually did the same thing that the nations did, and the nations were uncircumcised.
Yeah,
But,
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that it stopped them. I'm just saying, like, I'm saying though, you know, like kind of like what you said, like the sensitivity part. You know, like it's supposed to take away sensitivity, but I think it also is supposed to take away, in somewhat, to help eliminate that more of a drive. However, it didn't do that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it didn't
that's
do
what
that.
I'm saying. It didn't. Yeah, yeah. So I know that, you know, the way scientific studies go is they take like a testimony from like 10 people and then say 1 out of 10 people all over the world feels this. So, you know, but I see what you're saying though. But just to make it clear.
Yeah, just to add, it's kind of like, you know, when Shaul says, like, you know, the law, you know, Yahusha came to do what what the law cannot do by the works of the flesh. You know what I'm saying? Like, by the works of circumcising the flesh, it still didn't take people, you know what I'm saying, temptation away from doing the things that they're not supposed to be doing. But Yahusha did in circumcising our hearts. You know what I'm saying? Then he took away those desires of the flesh. If that kind of brings everything to, you know, I guess, full understanding. Like, just because they circumcised their flesh didn't do what it was supposed to do. You know, the law didn't do what it's supposed to do through the flesh, but Yahusha did. You know, but Yahuwah didn't come in sending his only begotten Son, circumcise our hearts. That way, the righteousness of the law could be lived out through the flesh,
right,
or through the Spirit. I'm sorry.
Right, and I just want to clarify what you're saying. It's from Romans chapter 8, and it says that what the law could not do because the weakness of the flesh. You know, so the law couldn't do anything because of how weak the flesh is. The Messiah came down, fulfilled it, so that way the requirements of the law could be fulfilled in us. So that's Romans chapter 8, verse 1 to 4. It tells you that the flesh was too weak to try to obtain righteousness by doing what it says. So even if they circumcised themselves, it did not lessen their sinful nature to partake in sexual wickedness. You see what I'm saying? Because the flesh is wicked. So even though you circumcise, it doesn't lessen the sinfulness of that desire. You know what I mean? But I do agree, it's simply a token of the righteousness, which it says, a token. A token is not it's a demonstration. It's not the actual power of anything. It doesn't, physical circumcision didn't lessen anything at all. Or then we can apply that same idea to other commandments. That other commandments can also in some way help, but the scriptures is clear. The law cannot help. It only reveals Yahuwah and his Son is what gives us the power. So the law cannot do it at all. At all. Doing the law cannot give you any type of power unless you have the Ruach already. Then the demonstration of the law reveals light and power to those who's watching. You know, so there has to be that connection. The Torah can't do anything but tell you something. You know, you could cut off the flesh, you could keep a feast, you could keep the Shabbat. It won't do nothing for you unless you are doing it from the heart, from the mind, the way that, by faith, the way that Yah wanted you to do from the very beginning. You know, so we have to make sure that we keep it that way. or we'll end up like these Pharisees that believe that's adding stuff to the salvation, to the initial salvation. And I hope that you understand what I'm saying when I say initial. Like when you are made righteous, the moment that you are made righteous cannot be connected to anything that you do. It has to be from Yah not imputing your sins to you and giving you righteousness. Then we see the Torah comes into the life, because the Torah has to be written in the mind. You see what I'm saying? If the Torah comes in the mind after you receive faith, you cannot keep Torah before you receive that faith. It has to be that formula, or you're gonna add something to the death and resurrection of Messiah. It has to stand alone, and it has to be the fuel of what causes you to keep righteousness, or the righteous law, or the righteous instructions, or you're going to be adding stuff to how you are saved. And that's what these individuals were doing. They were adding circumcision and other deeds that were good to being saved or justified by Yah, or receiving righteousness from Yah. And we have to know that Abraham didn't even receive righteousness that way. Abraham received righteousness by belief, by trust. He didn't receive righteousness by doing anything. So the same faith that Abraham had is the same faith that is being taught in scriptures we should also have. You see what I'm saying? So we can't add anything to helping us in any way, unless it's by the Ruach, of course. So we see that these Pharisees are trying to add circumcision to the salvation process, to receiving the gift of salvation. Another thing that I wanted to point out, verse 9 and 10. Verse 9 and 10. It says, no difference between us and, well, let me read verse, I guess I got to read verse, all right, I got to read verse 6 to 10. Does somebody want to read verse 6 to 10?
Oh, Acts?
Yeah. Acts 15, verse 6 to 10.
I thought you read up to 10. I mean, the Mecca, didn't he read up to 10 or no?
Yeah, Mecca read up to 10, but I wanted to emphasize on this last part. Because we talked long about the circumcision, I wanted to focus on the next statements, because it's used a lot.
Okay. Yeah, I'll read it. I just got this other translation up. Okay, so it says here in Acts 15, verse 6, and the apostles and elders came together to consider of this matter. And when there had been much disputing, Peter rose up and said unto them, men and brethren, you know how that a good while ago Elohim made choice among us, that the Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the good news and believe. And Elohim, which knoweth the hearts, bear them witness, giving them the Ruach HaKodesh, even as he did unto us. And put no difference between us and them, purifying their hearts by faith. Now therefore, why tempt you Elohim to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear?
Right. The yoke. Now let me ask the question to make sure that we all have, the same understanding. The yoke. And somebody tell me, what was the yoke of bondage, or the yoke that was upon that their fathers were not able to bear? The correlation is with putting something ahead of Messiah being the cause of our salvation. What was they telling you had to do to be saved? You had to do works, right? That you had to do works of your own accord to be saved. This is what they're asking you to do. So what did our forefathers fail at doing? Trying to receive salvation off of their works. Trying to obtain salvation by the things that they can do. That's what our fathers fell at. That's how they failed. So he's telling him, you want us to move the death and resurrection of Messiah aside for salvation and put circumcision, when our forefathers, being circumcised, fell in the wilderness, fell throughout history, fell during the captivity of Babylon, of the Philistines, because they could not do it with their own strength, their own ability. That's the yoke that they could not bear. The yoke that they could not bear is not circumcision or the Torah. And I want to show that. I want to show that one with Deuteronomy, chapter 30. And I want to go to, after that, I want to go to Galatians. So Deuteronomy chapter 30. All right. So looking at Deuteronomy chapter 30. Looking at verse 10 and 11. It says, if you shall hearken unto the voice of Yah your Elohim, to keep his commandments and his statutes, which are written in the book of the Torah, and if you turn unto Yah your Elohim with all your mind and with all your soul, for this is the commandment which I command you this day. It is not hidden from you, neither it is afar off. Does anybody have a different translation for it is not hidden? In verse 11 of Deuteronomy 30. Let me give you guys probably like 10 seconds. Just 5 seconds.
The one in the ISR, I'll read it. It says Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 11, right?
Yeah.
For this command which I am commanding you today, it is not too hard for you, nor is it far off.
Right. So, if the Torah was the yoke that our forefathers could not bear, why is Moses saying that this command to keep the statutes with all your heart and all your strength is not too hard for you or too far off? You see? So the command that's in the Torah is not the issue of what they could not bear. Because Moses said that it's not too hard. It was how they went about it. They could not keep it with their own strength. It was impossible. That's what Messiah said. With man, it's impossible. But with Yah, all things are possible. You see? So we're looking at these things and we're applying it just to the statements, the law of Moses, circumcision. We got to look at what the Torah actually says before we say that the Torah is a yoke that our fathers could not bear. Absolutely not. The Torah is not a yoke of bondage. Your own strength, your sinfulness is the bondage. That if you applied Messiah and the faith in Yah, the belief in Messiah and Father, it gives you the strength. Yahuwah is your strength, it says. So if they were to do it with Yahuwah being their strength, they would have been able to do it. But because they did it without faith, not all of them, because it said that Caleb gave his mind, it says he gave his heart entirely to Yah. That's the only way he was able to go into the promised land and live, be 80 years old, leading the army of Israel, is because he gave his heart and mind entirely to Yah. You see what I'm saying? So we have examples in the Torah of individuals who kept the Torah completely. So the Torah cannot be that which is too hard. So we cancel that out right away. Let me see whose hand is up. I can't. Oh, JP. Go ahead, JP.
No, just some cross references that as I looked up that verse, about yoke and there.
Right.
The first one was Matthew 11. Well, it says in 28, "Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And there's two more verses here. Another one out of Matthew 23:4. "For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers." And the last one, Galatians 5:1, which I think is I love this one. I mean, out of the three, it kind of lifts up. He says, "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Messiah hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage."
Yes.
And I feel like that one fit perfect of what you just stated. It's a freedom that we have in Messiah. Without Messiah, you're not made free. But through Messiah, and it's an interesting thing, when you're speaking about it. I guess my question or my thought is like, when you spoke about, you said Caleb, right?
Right.
Like, he must have had that understanding of Messiah.
You know what I'm saying? You have to.
Yeah.
To not, you see, one thing that we cannot do is we read one book, because the Ruach has moved these prophets into giving us the same message throughout history in different methods, different situations. You see what I'm saying? But when we say, we're talking like, we got to stop talking like Messiah wasn't relevant in their minds. You see, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 2 says that the gospel that was preached unto them was preached unto us. The same gospel, same good news was given to them. When was it given to them at the wilderness? It's in the Torah. But when we read Torah, we act like Messiah ain't there until the New Testament explains it. And that's the problem. They already knew the explanation. That's why the apostles taught the gospel from the Torah and the prophets, because they taught and showed how the Old Testament and the Torah already explained. What did Messiah say? "Oh, you believe Moses? Moses spoke of me." So when we read about Genesis is the same thing. These individuals knew that the things that they were being commanded to do represented the fulfillment. Why is he giving them a promise of a shadow? Obviously, he has to tell them what the actual promise is, right? If he gives you a seed, he's going to give you a promise of your son that's going to die, and then he's going to have a child that's going to die. But then there's this idea of a Messiah that's supposed to come through your loins. You see what I'm saying? We got to understand that the promise of Messiah was already understood in the bloodline, because the token was that it had to be a relative. It had to be in the family. So when they circumcised themselves, they realized that this was a representation of the family that the Messiah had to come from. But we see that the family wasn't only exclusive to those who were circumcised. Look at Naaman. Naaman received healing. Naaman was healed, but it didn't say that he got circumcised. It didn't even say that he started keeping Torah. It says that he came to Yah, came to his prophets, came to Elisha, and he received healing from Yah. Before, I don't know if later on in his life he started to do, I don't know. It doesn't give us that information. It just says that he goes back. So we have to keep in mind that we have Yah healing uncircumcised people in the Old Testament. through the mouth of the prophet Elisha. You know, so we gotta be more well-rounded. Look at what it says in Galatians chapter 3. Galatians chapter 3, verse 3, starting from verse 1. Sorry, Galatians chapter 3, starting from verse 3. We're gonna read a couple verses and then to show about the bondage. Look at this. It says, "O foolish Galatians, who have bewitched you, that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Yahushua the Messiah have been evidently set forth, crucified among you. This only would I learn of you. Have you received the Spirit by the works of the Torah, or by the hearing of faith? Are you so foolish, having begun in the Ruach, are you now made perfect by the flesh?" You see that? Verse 3. "Are you so foolish, having begun in the Ruach, are you now made perfect by the flesh?" See, the idea was that the Galatians were trying to be saved or to appease God with their works, with their actions. And he's saying this is not how you even receive the Ruach. You didn't even receive the Ruach that way. Why do you think that you need to continue that way? So we have to understand how the Torah applies, because it definitely applies, but it has to apply the right way, or we're going to be like these Galatians, trying to appease Yah by keeping some laws rather than walking in the Ruach. All right. So let's see. So the yoke of bondage that the forefathers in verse Acts chapter 15. Acts chapter 15, verse 10. It says, "Now therefore, why do you tempt Elohim to put a yoke upon the neck of the disciples, which neither our fathers nor we were able to bear?" It's not talking about the Torah being the yoke. It's talking about their own ability, their own strength. That's what led the people of Israel into captivity, because they tried to do things of their own strength and not through the strength of Yah. That's why it was a yoke. All right, so I hope that's clear. Got a video now. Gotta share this video. All right, so let me see. Who's this hand? I gotta go, JP. There you go. You're like the MVP right now.
No, I just wanted to bring up this. You know, I know it's just another area. I mean, it's always being spoken of. I feel like where it says in 15:7, it says in the middle of the verse, you know how that a good while ago Elohim made choice among us that the Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the good news and believe. And of course, Peter, you know, with the dream, right, is when he got that. And the word, you know, again, Gentiles here, I was just, you know, just to make it for sure, ethnos in the Greek, a race, a tribe, especially a foreign, non-Jewish, it says in the Strong's Concordance, one usually by implication pagan. But, you know, it could be used as the word Gentile, heathen, nation, or people. And it's just one of those areas where it says, you know, which I'm just, the reason I'm mentioning this because I've been watching some things and I'm like, man, I don't know where some of the brothers out in the world are not seeing this, you know, and so, and I would just probably have to pose that question to them, you know, but it just shows that opening, you know, that veil, I guess, you know.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's talking about the nations because he's specifically talking about the Roman centurion Cornelius, who was a Roman. There's no Hebrew Roman centurion. Let's just stop it there. There's no Hebrew that was a Roman centurion. A Roman citizen is different from a Roman centurion. Okay, that means that you are a part of the Roman army, that you Yeah. So Cornelius was not a Hebrew. Not a Hebrew. Matter of fact, he was from the Italian band. He sent the Italian band over there to go talk to him. And when he started speaking in tongues, how would they know what language? When they saw that he started speaking in the outside of his own language, that's how Peter knew. Like, oh snap, they got it the same way we got it. You see, he probably started speaking in Hebrew, maybe from Latin. You don't know. All you know is this guy wasn't a Hebrew dude. But yeah. So what? We want to go through the next 10 verses and then stop, or we want to stop here? JP is on for days.
If you need someone to read, I'm ready to read.
Go ahead, JP. 11 to 20. Go to 21. 11 to 21.
He says, verse 11 of chapter 15 of Acts, but we believe that through the grace of the sovereign Yahushua Messiah, we shall be saved, even as they. Then all the multitude kept silence and gave audience to Barnabas and Paul, declaring what miracles and wonders Elohim had wrought among the Gentiles by them. And after they had held their peace, James answered, saying, Men and brethren, hearken unto me. Simeon had declared how Elohim at the first did visit the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. And to this agree the words of the prophets, as it is written, after this I will return and will build again the tabernacle of David, which is fallen down, and I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up, that the residue of men might seek after Yahuwah, and all the Gentiles upon whom my name is called, saith Yahuwah, who doeth all these things. Known unto Elohim are all his works from the beginning of the world. Wherefore my sentence is, that we trouble not them which from among the Gentiles are turned to Elohim, but that we write unto them, that they abstain from pollutions of idols, and from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood. For Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Shabbat day.
There we go.
Man.
There we go, JP. This is gonna be the end of our study, because we're about to be here for a few minutes. So what do you see, brother? What do you see? I know you see a lot.
Well, I was just thinking, how it says, I guess, I already have spoken of it, just speaking about how Peter got the vision, and what is stated in 12 again. But I want to look up the cross-reference for 14, because he says, Simeon had declared how Elohim at the first did visit the Gentiles to take out of them a people for his name. And in here I have a cross-reference for Jeremiah 16, 19 to 21. It says, (16, 19 to 21) says, O Yahuwah, my strength and my fortress and my refuge in the days of affliction, the Gentiles shall come unto thee from the ends of the earth, and shall say, Surely our fathers have inherited lies, vanity, and things wherein there is no profit. Shall a man make mighty ones unto himself, and they are no mighty ones? Therefore, behold, I will this once cause them to know. I will cause them to know mine hand and my might, and they shall know that my name is Yahuwah. Wow, that's amazing.
That the Gentiles will say that our fathers have inherited lies. You see that?
Yeah.
The nations are recognizing that the false mighty ones that they are erecting or that they are following or giving themselves to, they have inherited worthlessness from their generations that they're gonna turn to Yah.
Right.
After knowing and seeing the miracles, seeing the wonders, power that He shows, So that's an amazing verse right there. That one should be on the books for especially for expressing how the Gentiles will come into the fold.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're gonna come into the fold because they're gonna recognize the views that they've had against Yah, or the views that they had in their own system is lies. So we need to recognize a lot of people are in this category, even individuals who maybe caught up in certain religious organizations, because a lot of those religious organizations are based off of lies that were inherited for years, passed down for years. You see what I'm saying? So people are literally believing things because their parents believed it or because their grandparents believed it. You see what I'm saying? So we need to realize that this same mindset is happening in our day. But Yah said He's going to wake them up. They're going to recognize that they have inherited lies. And they're going to turn to the scriptures and scriptures alone to see who Yahuwah is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And just to add to the the understanding you're expressing is the erecting of different type of, it's of course we see that it's idolatry, we know it's idolatry, but one of the things that is noticeable when you go into the New Age churches of today are still statues, what I'm saying, of a cross. It could be a giant cross in the front of the church inside the building, and people are looking at that. They're looking towards it for salvation. They might not everybody might not understand it that way, but subliminally to me they're worshiping it. They're saying, it's like they're, instead of taking out all this idols out of your congregation or your assembly or your church, whatever you may want to call it, and saying, praise Him, just praise Yah. That's it. You don't need nothing like that. And I feel like that's what I was seeing too here when it says, our fathers have inherited lies, vanity, and things wherein there is no profit. So I was seeing that. It was just, I was thinking about that. It's just been coming up in my mind. So praise Yah.
No, I agree, man. Praise Yah. I agree. When we're looking at the way that the cross, look at the rosaries, look at how they present, the cross, not like a memorial of the wickedness done to the Messiah, but they're looking at the cross not in the idea that the scriptures reveal, but they're looking at the actual emblem of the death tree,
right,
as something that they could hold around their neck. You know what I mean? And count the beads and say a prayer with each bead, that's pagan by itself. Right. We don't apply emblems, or we would have saw it. We would have saw it in the writings of Paul, Peter, John. We would have saw it in the Gospels. We would have saw Messiah instituting that. You see what I'm saying? When He instituted the Master's Supper, on Passover, He didn't institute wear a cross. He actually says, bear your cross and follow me.
Yeah.
So it's not talking about wearing it on your neck. It's talking about your lifestyle. So if it was something He wanted us to do to demonstrate anything, He would have told us, just like He told us to Master Supper. All right, so let's see. Acts chapter 15. There's something interesting in Acts chapter 15. Anybody recognize or realize that there's talks about a rebuilding of a temple? I know everybody's talking about the third time the temple is rebuilt, but look at what he's saying here. that a temple is being rebuilt. You see what I'm saying? This is one of the beliefs that I have personally, is that this is the third temple. This is the temple that he's building. You see what I'm saying? You have the first one with Solomon, you have the second one, and now you have, this one. So when you at Acts chapter 15, let me read it from verse 16, right? Verse 15 down. It says, "And to this agree the words of the prophets, as it is written, after this I will return and I will build again the tabernacle of David, which is fallen down, and I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up, that the residue of men," I want you guys to focus on that the residue of men might seek after Yah, and all the nations upon whom my name is called, saith Yah, who does all these things. Watch this. I'm going to read it from the prophet in the book of Amos. The book of Amos, chapter 9, starting from verse 11. Okay? Pay attention. I'm talking to everybody watching the video. It says in verse 11 of Amos chapter 9, the prophet Amos chapter 9, starting from verse 11, it says, "In that day will I raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof, and I will raise up his ruins, and I will build it as in the days of old, that they may possess and remember the remnant of Edom." Woo-hoo! Acts says the remnant of men. So Edom is a representation of the nations, because that's how it's interpreted in Acts 15, that the remnant of all men, and for all the heathen which are called by my name, saith Yah, that doeth this. You see that? So the temple that's being built is the one that Messiah is building. The tabernacle of David is referring to the tabernacle that David was going to build, but his son Solomon built it. David provided all the materials, and then his son built the actual temple. It connects in the mind. Yahuwah provides all the people, because remember, Messiah says, you cannot come to me unless the Father draws you. The Messiah said you can't come to the Messiah unless the Father draws you to the Messiah. In Matthew 16, he asked Peter, who do you say I am? He said, you're the son of Yah, you're the Messiah. And you know what he said? He said, flesh and blood did not reveal that to you. My Father in heaven revealed this to you. So we see the Father is providing all of the stones, which is us, for the Messiah to build by the Ruach. This is the temple that fell. Obviously, we see what happened. Messiah was killed. But look at what it says in Acts 15. The Ruach being given to the nations is the fulfillment of the tabernacle of David being built. So we have to understand what are the pieces that's building the tabernacle of David. It's the Jews and the nations. The Jews and the Gentiles. The circumcision, the uncircumcision. When the uncircumcised nations began to believe, this is when he said it's a fulfillment of Amos chapter 9 of the tabernacle being built. Not when Israel started to believe, but when the nation started to believe, that's when the tabernacle was being rebuilt. All right, who's the hand? JP, go ahead. Like you, JP.
And I want to also mention that the verse specifically in 17 says, upon whom my name is called. So not just all Gentiles in general, you know what I'm saying? Not just everybody, But it says, upon whom my name is called, saith Yahuwah, who doeth all these things. So I guess my question will be presented is, what are all these things? But I just wanted to also mention that to clarify that it's not just every Gentile, it's not just a person who lives in Israel today, but it's those that call on the name of Yah and doeth all these things. So if you could just, if whatever your understanding is of all these things, I would like to hear.
All right. So all these things and do. Who doeth all these things? Let me see. Let me
Maybe
double
gotta
check
go
it.
back
Just
to Amos.
that's what I'm about to go back to. See, it just slipped out of my hand. Doing this manually, guys.
Hey, that's the best way to go.
Yeah. All right. All right. Here we go. So does Amos? Let me see if Amos says it. Yeah, it says in verse 17 of Amos 9. No, verse 12 of Amos 9. It says that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the heathen which are called by my name. So Edom and the heathen are called by his name, by the way.
Right.
Just putting that out there
Yeah.
for all the Edomites. It says, which are called by my name, saith Yah, that doeth this. So it's talking about, it seems like it's talking about, I'm trying to be sure. I don't want to say, it seems like he's talking about those who call on his name, but it says, which are called by his name.
Right.
That they may possess. They that possess the remnant of Edom and all the heathen which are called by my name, says Yah. Oh, Yah is the one doing this. Sorry. It says, saith Yah, that doeth this. So what is it actually referring to is talking about Yah, by Yah's power, the temple is being built. Or that the people are being called by his name. Saith Yah, that doeth it. Yah is the one that does it.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the temple that's built without man's hands. This is one of those temples that's not built by man's hands. So when you're looking at the temple of our bodies, it's not built by man's hands. It is the temple of the Ruach. So likewise, it says here that he's going to rebuild the tabernacle of David, and all of those who seek after him, whom my name is called, saith Yah, who doeth all these things. So again, in Acts 15, it shows that Yah is the one that does these things.
Right.
That man doesn't do these things. And I want to show an instance in 1 Peter, I believe. Let's go to 1 Peter. I'm not sure because I always get 1 and 2 Peter mixed up. 1 Peter chapter 2. Yep, because he starts talking about how, well, let's read it. So 1 Peter chapter 2. We're going to start from verse 2. It says, no, I'm going to start from verse 3. Verse 3. It says, if so be you have tasted that Yah is gracious, to whom coming as unto a living stone, talking about Messiah, the master, I guess. The master is gracious. To whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of Elohim, but precious. It says, you also are lively stones, are built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to Elohim by Yahushua the Messiah. And then it says a little bit down, talking about Messiah as the chief cornerstone, it says in verse 7, unto you therefore which believe he is precious, but unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. And then verse 9, it says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth praises of him who have called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in time past were not a people, but are now the people of Elohim, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. You see the same message in the book of Hosea as well. But the emphasis I wanted to put was the tabernacle of David being rebuilt when the Gentiles, and here we have Peter, of course, he said he was also called to go to the Gentiles in Acts 15. So here, Peter is talking to the Gentiles. And he's saying that you was once not a people, but now you are a people, and that you are stones to be built up into a spiritual house. Let me go to one more verse emphasizing on the temple being rebuilt. Ephesians chapter 2. Now, this is not being built by man. Man is not making another person into a stone or making another person into a... It's interesting that he talks about us being lively stones, because John the Baptist made a reference saying, stop saying to yourselves that you are Abraham's seed, for isn't Yah able to make these stones Abraham's seed? So it's interesting that he uses the term stones as a reference to how Peter uses the term stones on how Yah is making a temple. So Ephesians chapter 2, looking at verse 4, talking about the 14, 18, talking about the Gentiles again. It says here, starting from verse 18 of Ephesians chapter 2, it says, for through him we both have access by one Spirit unto the Father. Now therefore you are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of Elohim. And look at verse 20. And are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Yahushua the Messiah himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together grows unto a holy temple in the Master, in whom you also are builded together for a habitation of Elohim through the Ruach. So this language of this temple being rebuilt is all throughout the epistles, the letters of the disciples. So we see that this idea of this temple being rebuilt by Yah himself, and without man's hands, is being perpetuated, so we can understand that he's going to fulfill that temple, that dwelling in that temple, that glorified temple that he's going to create through his people. His people is going to be the temple. Not only us individually, but collectively we make up a temple for him. You see that? So Acts 15 poses the answer to Amos chapter 9. And when the nations began to receive the Ruach, that they were completing the prophecy of the temple being rebuilt. This is amazing. This is amazing. So when people are there looking, they're looking for another temple. The temple is supposed to be Yah's people united. Right now, all of these people who claim to be believers are divided. So they don't show a temple. It's divided just like the way that the Messiah lived. When the Messiah lived, the religious people at that time were divided from him. They were divided from one another. The Sadducees and Pharisees and scribes used to fight amongst each other all day long. You see what I'm saying? And when Messiah came, he didn't find a group of people for him. So the Messiah, through the Ruach, is going to build his own temple. and we are the stones that he uses to build the temple, and he is the cornerstone. He's the head cornerstone of this temple that holds it all together. So I just think it's amazing how the fulfillment, the prophets waited for this fulfillment because Israel was constantly rebellious. Israel was constantly idol worshiping and all of these things. So to see that that Yah is going to do this himself, I mean, it takes the burden off of us for us trying to put everybody together. The Ruach is going to put everybody together. We just need to inspect each other and make sure that we're keeping each other accountable to Yah's word, not our standard, but to Yah's standard. Go ahead, JP.
Yeah, and just to I think that's an interesting and it's a great interpretation, an understanding of the temple, the third temple, because we see that right now, they talk about it all the time. If you can see throughout the YouTube world is, that the Jewish people over there, they're saying, they're building, they're raising money, there's foundations and all these to build a temple itself, So, but I just wanted to kind of talk about also the last verse that we just read, the last three of the 15, 19 to 21. It says, wherefore my sentences that we trouble not them which from among the Gentiles are turned to Elohim, but that we write unto them that they abstain from pollutions of idols, that's one, and from fornication, that's two, and from things strangled, and from blood. So there's these like prerequisites of what they should. Let's put this, and this is like this is what they should start with in a sense, And then he says in 21, for Moses of old time hath in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Shabbat day. Right. So it's just amazing. I mean, and Emeka spoke about this a while back, just of the understanding of when you evangelize or you're speaking to somebody about what, because of course, when they see how you're walking today, it seems like it's very far from them. They're like it's a lot, it's a lot. Like to keep the law, that's a lot. It's just so far. But if you give them this, then you're just saying, here, this is where you're gonna start. Like this is, and then you're saying, and then every Shabbat you're gonna be reading the Tanakh. You're gonna be reading the Old Testament, and then and everything else will catch up, in your life. So, right. What are your thoughts on those portions? I mean, I like that one.
Yeah, no, the verse 21, clear. Gentiles every Shabbat reading the Torah. Like, not only reading, but they have people preaching the Torah to them. So they're not only studying the Torah, there's people teaching the Torah also to them. So to say that the Gentiles now, like the law is done away, is nailed to the cross, and the Gentiles are now walking in a different method, that's incorrect. That's horribly incorrect. We see here that he's given them items out of Torah because when they believed with their mind and they came to Yah, these were the things that they were still practicing. You see what I'm saying? When you look at the book of Romans, when you look at the book of Galatians, Colossians, you'll see that, Corinthians, he's talking to them about fornication because they're practicing fornication. He's talking to them about idols and eating things strangled in the book of Romans because they're doing it. And their faith is being affected by the mixing of what they used to do and what they have to do now. You see what I'm saying? So this was definitely inspired to tell them, hey, dude, keep from these things because these things the Gentiles are currently involved in. They understand the Shabbat because when they converted, they're told they're following after those who taught them. So they taught them, hey, this is what we're supposed to do. So they believe in Messiah. So they're every Shabbat they're there, ready to hear the word. But you have the Torah. Torah's big. You may not get to the Leviticus 17 with the life is in the blood. You may not get to the strangled and things off of the eye. You may not get to that, but we need to explain. Hey, you guys need to abstain from these things and start developing a new lifestyle practice. And then let them learn everything else. That's what we're supposed to do as well. We don't go bringing somebody in saying, "Hey, grow your beard," or nah. We tell people the things. We look at their lives. Hey, I see that you're struggling with this. I see that you're fighting this. I see that you're still doing this. So let me show you right now, because that's what you're currently practicing. Everything else you would learn. So when you read the epistles of Paul, you'll see that he's addressing the same things that they're trying to tell the Gentiles not to do right away. You see what I'm saying? Because that's what they came out of. So that's what they're continuing to practice without knowing. Not that they knew, but without knowing. So, yeah, there's a lot. This was a lot. This was definitely a lot. I hope this ain't a 2-hour video. But thank you for joining our study. This is Acts chapter 15, verse 1 to 21. We're going to finish the next half next week. Shalom, everybody.